It's strange, the details your mind decides to keep. The way the hallway light flickered that night, the hum of the vending machine down the corridor, the faint scent of antiseptic that never quite leaves the air. I can still hear the heart monitor, steady, rhythmic, until it wasn't. That sound, that long, unbroken tone, still follows me in my sleep. It was supposed to be an ordinary night shift. I'd been a charge nurse for almost 15 years. You learn to read people, the anxious families, the hopeful ones, the ones who already know how the night will end. But that night, I missed something enormous. Our patient, a man in his late 50s named Harold, had been stable, post-op, recovering well, joking with the staff just hours before. He'd asked me if I could get him Jell-O after midnight rounds. I remember laughing and saying, "Only if you promise to behave." He smiled, and a few hours later, he was gone. The code blue call went out, echoing through the ward. Every muscle in my body moved on instinct. Adrenaline, training, muscle memory. We rushed in. Chest compressions, epinephrine, defibrillator charged. The sound of the paddles snapping together. The smell of burning skin? Nothing. His vitals never came back. We did everything right. But the moment I looked at his face, pale, serene, too serene, something felt wrong. Afterward, when the chaos subsided and the room fell quiet, I stood there, pen hovering over the chart. I wrote, "Time of death, 2:37 a.m. It should have been just another line in another shift report, but I felt my hand tremble as I signed my name. I helped wheel his body down to the morgue myself. The gurney wheels squeaked softly on the linoleum floor. The hallway felt longer than usual, sterile, empty, humming with fluorescent light, and that's when I saw him. Charles. He was standing alone at the nurse's station, half in shadow, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. His eyes caught mine for a moment, calm, almost peaceful. He smiled faintly, not cruel, not kind, just knowing. I nodded back, because what else do you do? He'd been my coworker for months, one of the most reliable nurses on the floor. Everyone liked him. Everyone trusted him. But that night, something about that smile, that stillness, lodged itself deep in my chest. When I finally clocked out at dawn, I sat in my car in the parking lot and couldn't bring myself to turn the key. I stared at the hospital windows, watching the sun rise against the glass, and felt this strange heaviness settle in my stomach. It wasn't grief exactly. It was confusion, unease, as if I'd missed a step somewhere, a detail that could have changed everything. At the time, I told myself it was just fatigue, just another bad night. But years later, when the truth came out, when the body count began to rise and the headlines started screaming his name, I realized what I'd really seen that night wasn't a bad shift. It was the moment I'd brushed shoulders with evil, disguised as compassion. And the most chilling part? I wasn't the only one who'd missed it. Pause. At the time I thought it was just another bad night. My older voice says, quieter now. I didn't know I'd just witnessed one of the hundreds of murders he would commit, right under our noses. Before that night, before the silence that would come to define everything, there was a time when I thought of Charles as a friend. Back then, our ICU ward felt like a second family, a place held together by caffeine, gallows humor, and exhaustion. We were the ones who stayed long after visiting hours, the ones who kept the hospital alive when the rest of the world was asleep. You can't survive in that kind of chaos without learning to rely on each other completely. Charles fit into that rhythm effortlessly. He was soft-spoken, always polite, never complained, even during double shifts that left the rest of us half dead on our feet. When the rest of us were fraying from fatigue, he was calm. Too calm in hindsight. He'd hum quietly while preparing medications, eyes focused, movements precise. There was a steadiness to him that made patients feel safe. He was the kind of nurse families thanked by name. I remember one night when a patient's husband brought donuts for the staff. Everyone laughed, joked, crowded the nurse's station. Charles sat with us, smiling shyly. When one of the new hires teased him about being the hospital saint, he just shook his head and said softly, "No, I just don't like seeing people in pain." At the time, I thought that was beautiful. That's what you want in a nurse. Empathy, compassion, the willingness to care when others can't. He had this way of stepping in before you even asked for help. A code would break out, and there he was. Gloves on, IV lines ready, adrenaline drawn. He was quick, efficient, unflappable, and when it was over, he'd quietly clean up the mess no one else wanted to face. We all trusted him. I did most of all. Looking back, I wonder if that's what made him so dangerous. He knew how to earn our faith, how to use the language of kindness as camouflage. Other nurses described him the same way. A little odd, but kind. Perfectionist, someone who cared too much. The kind of coworker who'd bring you coffee after a rough shift or cover your patient load so you could catch your breath. We saw him as dependable, maybe a little lonely, maybe struggling with something personal but harmless. If anyone had told me then what he was capable of, I would have laughed. I would have defended him. That's the thing about trust. It blinds you in the most human way. It makes you see what you want to see. Years later, when the truth surfaced, I'd replay those nights over and over in my mind. The smiles, the small talk, the quiet hum of the IV pumps. I'd realize how easily kindness can hide something monstrous. How we mistake calm for virtue. We were so desperate for good nurses, I say now, my voice catching slightly. None of us wanted to believe that compassion could be a mask. And then, quietly, almost as a whisper, the thought that still haunts me. It began as a whisper in my mind, the kind of thought you try to push away because you're afraid of what it might mean. At first it was just numbers, patient names, room numbers, dates, deaths that seemed unrelated, except they weren't. They shared something invisible, something that only made sense when you looked closely enough. It started with Harold, the patient from that night. Then there was Mrs. Lattimore, who'd been improving after pneumonia, Mr. Reeves, recovering well after surgery. And then a young man, only 32, admitted for dehydration. Different ages, different diagnoses, different wards, but all of them had one thing in common. Charles had been on duty. I remember the first time I noticed it, really noticed it. It was 2 weeks after Harold's death. I was reviewing patient files for shift reports, flipping through charts in the dim light of the nurse's station. The hum of machines filled the background, the hospital alive with its strange nocturnal rhythm. My eyes drifted to the staff logs, tracing the initials at the bottom of each page. CC, again and again. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. He worked a lot of nights. He volunteered for every shift, every unit that needed help. It made sense he'd be there. But coincidences have a way of multiplying when you ignore them. Soon the whispers turned into questions I couldn't silence. Why did the IV bags look different after he'd been in a room? Why were certain medications always missing? Digoxin, insulin, lidocaine, drugs that, in the wrong dose, could stop a heart without leaving a clear trace. I remember one night, standing in the medication room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at an empty slot in the narcotics drawer. I checked the log. Charles had signed it out. My pulse quickened. I waited for the next dose to be recorded. It wasn't. I told myself there must have been an error. There are always errors in hospitals. Small ones that get lost in paperwork, human oversights. But this one felt different. I decided to speak to the supervisor once. I still remember her face. Tired, kind, pragmatic. I told her something felt wrong. That I couldn't explain it yet, but the numbers didn't make sense. She listened, sighed, and said, "You know how it is, Maggie. People die here. That's what we do. Don't let it get to you." And that night, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pattern of my wood grain as though it could answer me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was letting paranoia creep in. But a part of me, the part trained to notice small details, knew better. I started keeping quiet notes. Times, medications, names. It felt obsessive, maybe even dangerous. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every instinct screamed that something was hiding beneath the surface. Something dark. And yet, every time I thought about going further, about saying more, I'd hear that supervisor's voice again. "People die here. Don't let it get to you." That was the silence that kept him safe. The silence that kept all of us complicit. I look back now and realize that the most terrifying sound in a hospital isn't the code alarm or the flat line. It's the quiet that follows. When no one wants to see what's right in front of them. Every time I thought about saying something, I whisper, I reminded myself, what if I was wrong? What if it was just bad luck? But deep down, I already knew it wasn't luck. It was murder. There comes a moment when denial runs out of places to hide. For me, it happened on a rainy Thursday, during a shift that started like any other. The floor was busy, short-staffed as usual, and I was running from one room to another, juggling patient charts and medication schedules. I remember thinking how ordinary everything felt. The sound of rolling beds, the murmur of families in the hallway, the faint smell of coffee someone had burned in the break room, and then I heard it, the sound that never leaves you. A code blue, room 312, I ran. We all did. The patient was a young woman, only 33. She'd undergone routine surgery the day before. Her vitals had been steady. She'd even been sitting up earlier, texting her husband. Now, she was pale and unresponsive. Charles was already in the room when I arrived, standing beside her bed. His expression was blank, detached. I saw his hands resting on the IV line, and for a brief second, something in my gut twisted. I don't know why, but I hesitated. Just one heartbeat, long enough to notice the bag hanging above her head. It looked off, cloudy somehow. I reached for it, but he stepped forward, cutting me off gently. "She's gone," he said softly. "Let her go." The room seemed to shrink. I remember the sound of the monitor flatlining, the way the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were watching. Everyone moved mechanically. Compressions, epinephrine, defibrillator. We fought for her. But deep down, I already knew. When it was over, I stood there with the crash cart still open, sweat dripping down my back, and I felt something inside me break. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. After the chaos died down, I went straight to the med room. I pulled her chart, checked her labs. Her numbers didn't make sense. She shouldn't have crashed. There was no warning, no trigger. Unless I turned to the schedule board. My hand trembled as I traced the dates. The last 6 deaths. All during his shifts, my chest tightened. I felt sick. Not from fear, but from the realization that I'd known, on some level, for weeks. I'd known and done nothing. I stayed late that night, long after the ward had quieted. I combed through every patient file I could find, comparing times, medications, staff logs. The pattern was undeniable now. The deaths lined up like dominoes, all falling when he was near. By morning, I couldn't pretend anymore. I walked straight into the administrator's office, my voice shaking but firm. "Something's wrong," I said. "You need to look into Charles." That was the moment everything changed. Because once you speak a truth like that out loud, you can't take it back. I remember staring at her face, that young mother, and realizing I couldn't pretend anymore. I say now. I had to choose, silence or truth. I chose truth. And it nearly destroyed me. I wish I could tell you that once I reported him, everything changed. That the hospital leapt into action, that justice arrived swiftly, that the death stopped. But it didn't happen like that. The truth moved slowly, painfully, deliberately, through layers of red tape, legal fear, and institutional silence. When I told administration what I'd found, they listened, or at least they pretended to. They thanked me for my concern, promised they'd look into it, and asked me not to discuss it with anyone else while they conducted a review. For a few days, I almost believed them. I wanted to believe them. But inside the hospital, nothing changed. Charles kept working. Patients kept dying. And I was told more than once to focus on my duties and leave investigations to management. It was the kind of language hospitals use when they're trying to make something disappear quietly. At first, I thought maybe they didn't see what I saw. Maybe they didn't have the full picture. So I gathered more. I wrote down names, times, medication logs, details that gnawed at me night after night. I handed them over. And then he was gone, just like that, transferred to another facility. No public explanation, no investigation, no police report. I remember standing at the nurse's station the morning after he left, staring at his empty locker. There was a sticky note still attached to it, a reminder in his neat handwriting that said, "Check expiration dates." I felt a chill run through me. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air and we were all just expected to move on. Months later, I heard he'd found a new job at another hospital. The same position, the same responsibilities, the same access to medication. It made me sick to my stomach. How could anyone let that happen? How could an institution built on healing quietly pass a man like that to the next unsuspecting ward? I would learn later that this was not the first time, nor the last. Hospital after hospital had done the same thing. Each time suspicions arose, he was quietly let go. No report to the authorities, no warning to future employers. The administrators wanted it gone, scrubbed from their records. "He's no longer our problem," one executive was quoted as saying years later during the investigation. But he was everyone's problem, every patient's problem. Medical experts later described it as a systemic failure. But that phrase feels too clean, too polite. What it really was cowardice. A chain of silence held together by fear of lawsuits, bad press, and losing trust. So they chose the easier evil, to look away. When the truth finally broke years later, it wasn't just one hospital under scrutiny, it was an entire system, one that valued reputation more than accountability. He was passed around like a problem no one wanted to own, I say softly now. Every death was just another statistic, until they couldn't hide it anymore. The thought still burns, because behind every statistic was a name, a face, a family, and every single one of them trusted us to keep them safe. The candlelight vigils came later. Photos lined up on folding tables. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, their faces glowing in the soft light of memorial flames. I attended one. I stood in the back, anonymous, and whispered a promise to the silence that surrounded us. Never again. Years passed before the truth finally clawed its way into the light. By then, I'd transferred to another hospital myself, trying to outrun the unease that had followed me since the night everything fell apart. But you can't outrun ghosts, especially when they wear scrubs and a smile you once trusted. The news broke on a cold December morning. I was on my way to work when my phone buzzed. A former coworker's text flashed across the screen. "They got him." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I pulled over on the side of the road, staring at those words as if they were written in another language. They got him. Charles Cullen, the quiet nurse, the helper, the man who had stood beside me in 100 emergencies, had been arrested. Not for negligence, not for a single error in judgment, but for murder. Dozens of them. Maybe more. I remember the first press conference. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The police chief standing stiffly behind a podium. "We believe Mr. Cullen may have been responsible for as many as 40 deaths," he said. Gasps rippled through the room. But I remember thinking, only 40? Because deep down, I knew it was worse. When investigators finally pieced it together, the real number was staggering. More than 400 suspected deaths across multiple hospitals, 400 lives, extinguished in the very place they came to be saved. The police reached out to former staff for statements. I sat in a gray interview room, my hands shaking as I described what I'd seen. The cloudy IV bag, the medication logs, the gut instinct I'd ignored for too long. The detective listened quietly, scribbling notes, his face expressionless. But when I finished, he set his pen down and said softly, "You weren't the only one who tried." That broke something in me. I wasn't the only one who'd seen the pattern. Others had spoken up too, and just like me, they'd been dismissed, silenced, or ignored. When they showed footage of the interrogation, I couldn't look away. There he was, sitting across from detectives, calm, polite, his hands folded neatly on the table. When they asked him why, he didn't hesitate. "I thought I was ending suffering," he said. His voice was almost gentle. "I thought I was helping. The word cut like glass. I wanted to scream at the screen to tell him he'd destroyed families, broken faith, left an entire profession haunted. But he sat there, unmoved, as if he truly believed it. After the trial, after the guilty pleas, after the life sentences were handed down, I thought I'd feel relief. I didn't. What I felt was hollow. Like justice had arrived too late to matter. I remember watching the news that night, the camera panning across the courthouse steps. Reporters called him the angel of death. I hated that phrase. Angels bring peace. He brought nothing but suffering. I wanted to be sick, I admit, in a whisper. I wanted to quit nursing, but mostly, I wanted to understand why. No one ever truly did. Not the psychiatrists, not the courts, not even him. He said he was ending suffering. My voice fades, heavy with disbelief. But he created more suffering than any of us could ever comprehend. And that's the part that still keeps me up at night. The way evil can hide behind mercy and call itself good. It's been more than 20 years, but sometimes when I walk into a hospital, I still feel the air shift. That quiet hum beneath the machines. The smell of bleach and fear and hope mingled together. Hospitals never forget. Their walls remember every life that ended within them. Every secret whispered between shifts. Every silence that cost too much. I retired a few years after his arrest. I told people I was just tired, that I'd given enough of myself to medicine. But the truth is, I couldn't stand the sound of heart monitors anymore. Every beat felt like a question I couldn't answer. Every patient reminded me of the ones I'd failed. I still dream about that ward sometimes. I see the flicker of the fluorescent lights, hear the shuffle of shoes against tile. I walk past empty rooms where the beds are perfectly made, and I can almost feel the presence of those we lost, their absence hanging heavier than air. I've spent a lifetime trying to understand how something so monstrous could hide in plain sight, how someone could commit evil under the guise of compassion, and how so many of us, myself included, didn't see it, or maybe didn't want to. For a long time, guilt was the only thing I felt. It sat in my chest like lead. I blame myself for not shouting louder, for not fighting harder, for trusting someone I shouldn't have. But over time I learned that guilt can either bury you or build you. I chose to let it build me. Now I teach nursing students. Young, bright faces who still believe they're stepping into a world defined by kindness and purpose. And I tell them stories. Not to scare them, but to remind them of the weight they carry. I tell my nursing students now, I say to the camera, my voice steady, the moment something feels wrong, listen to it. That instinct, that whisper inside can save lives. Silence never does. They always go quiet when I say that. And I can see the question in their eyes. The one that haunted me for years. How could it happen? How could no one stop him? There isn't one answer. It wasn't just one man. It was a system built on silence, fear, and the fragile hope that good intentions are enough. Still, I like to believe something changed because of it. Laws were rewritten. Hospitals became more transparent. Reporting systems got stronger. And somewhere, a patient lived because someone refused to stay quiet. That's what keeps me from drowning in the memories. The thought that maybe, just maybe, speaking up saved someone I'll never meet. Sometimes I visit the old hospital grounds. The ward where it happened has long been closed. The windows are boarded now, the hallways dark. But when I stand there, I swear I can still hear echoes. The faint rhythm of footsteps, the hum of machines, the heartbeat of everything we tried to protect. Sometimes, I whisper, the real horror in medicine isn't what we see under the microscope. It's what we refuse to see standing right beside us. The camera lingers as I turn away, the corridor stretching behind me like a ghost. The monitor's hum fades once more into silence, not empty this time, but heavy with meaning, because in the end, it isn't the deaths that haunt me most. It's the silence that allowed them.